The hum of the airport was a familiar beast, a low-grade thrum that vibrated through the soles of my shoes and settled in my bones. For 3 years, this sound had been the soundtrack to my life, the prelude and postscript to every client meeting, every sterile conference room, every lonely hotel bed. It was a life of perpetual motion that felt, ironically, like standing perfectly still. My days were a blur of identical gate numbers and overpriced coffees, a routine so ingrained it had worn smooth, featureless grooves into my soul. I was an observer by nature and by trade, a data analyst who saw the world in patterns and probabilities. The pattern of my own life was a flat line of quiet dissatisfaction. I was good at my job. I could take a chaotic sea of information and find the elegant, hidden narrative within it. I could predict market trends and consumer behavior with unnerving accuracy. But I couldn't, for the life of me, predict the trajectory of my own heart, which had been orbiting a single, silent star for the better part of 2 years. That star was Alex Thorne. Alex was the opposite of a flat line. He was a jagged, unpredictable peak on an otherwise tedious graph. He worked in project management, the guy they sent in when a deal was falling apart or a client was threatening to walk. He was calm in the face of chaos, a steadying presence that seemed to generate its own gravitational pull. People listened when he spoke, not because he was loud, but because his voice was a low, resonant thing that carried weight and assurance. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested a deep, untapped well of physical confidence. He was, in a word, everything I was not. I was the guy in the corner of the meeting room, the one who spoke only when asked a direct question, whose insights were delivered in quiet, clipped sentences. He was the one at the head of the table, leaning forward on his forearms, holding the room captive with nothing more than a level gaze and the quiet certainty of his words. I had spent countless hours watching him, cataloging the small details that no one else seemed to notice. The way a muscle in his jaw would tick when he was concentrating. The way he'd run a hand over the back of his neck when he was tired, a gesture of profound weariness that he quickly hid. The almost imperceptible quirk at the corner of his mouth that passed for a smile. My fascination was a secret I kept locked away, a fragile, glass-blown thing I was terrified of shattering. It was an ache of unrequited longing that had become so constant, I barely noticed it anymore. It was just another part of the background hum, like the drone of the airplane engines or the beat of my own lonely heart. Tonight, the hum was different. It was agitated, angry. A freak early-season blizzard had descended upon Chicago, smothering O'Hare in a thick blanket of white and grounding everything. The departure board was a sea of red. Canceled. Canceled. Delayed. Canceled. The terminal was a swirling eddy of frustrated humanity, a chaotic ballet of frantic phone calls and defeated sighs. I had managed to secure the last room at the airport hotel, a small mercy I attributed to my compulsive habit of planning for the worst. My flight, like everyone else's, was officially dead until morning. I found a seat at the crowded terminal bar, a small island of overpriced solace in the storm. I ordered a whiskey and watched the snow whip against the giant plate glass windows. And that's when I saw him. Alex. He was standing near the bar, phone pressed to his ear, his broad shoulders set against the tide of panicked travelers. He wasn't frantic. He looked resigned, annoyed, but calm. Always calm. He ended his call with a quiet curse I couldn't hear but could read on his lips, then shoved his phone into the pocket of his jacket. His eyes scanned the chaos, and, for a heart-stopping moment, they landed on me. There was no flicker of recognition at first, just the blank assessment of a stranger. I was just another face in the crowd. My stomach twisted with a familiar, bitter pang of invisibility. I was about to look away, to retreat into the safety of my whiskey glass, when his expression shifted. A faint line appeared between his brows, and then, a slow, tired recognition dawned. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod and began to navigate his way through the crowd toward me. My heart kicked into a frantic, uneven rhythm. This was not part of the pattern. Alex and I existed in separate professional orbits. We exchanged pleasantries at the coffee machine. We sat in the same meetings, but we didn't talk. Not really. My mind raced, searching for a script, a protocol for this unforeseen interaction. I found nothing. He stopped beside my small, wobbly table. "Leo," he said, His voice was just as I remembered it from meetings, low and gravelly, a sound that seemed to cut straight through the surrounding noise. Up close, it was even more potent. It felt like a physical thing, settling in my chest. Alex, I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. Bad luck, huh? You could say that a ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. He smelled faintly of the cold air from outside, clean and sharp, layered over the subtle, warm scent of his cologne. My connection to Denver just got axed. Everything's booked solid. The whole city. I watched him, taking in the details I could only ever glimpse from across a boardroom. The dark stubble that shadowed his jaw, the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. He looked tired, but solid, unflappable. He was the stoic protector, the man who handled things. And right now, he was a man with nowhere to go. The next words came out of my mouth before I had a chance to analyze them, to weigh the probability of humiliation and reject the notion entirely. It was a reckless, impulsive act, a complete deviation from my established character. I got a room, I said, at the Hyatt. Just now. His gaze sharpened, focusing on me with an intensity that made the air feel thin. He was assessing me, I realized, the same way he assessed a failing project or a difficult client. I felt suddenly transparent, my ridiculous, hopeless crush laid bare under that steady scrutiny. Yeah, he said, his tone unreadable. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah, I was just heading over. I gestured vaguely with my glass, sloshing amber liquid onto the table. I cursed myself internally. Smooth. Very smooth. Alex didn't seem to notice. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes still locked on mine. The background noise of the terminal faded away. It was just the two of us, suspended in a bubble of quiet tension. I could feel a flush creeping up my neck. I was sure he was going to decline, to give me a polite but firm, thanks, but I'll figure something out, and I would be left to crawl away and die of shame. Instead, he gave another one of those short, decisive nods. Okay, he said, the word a simple, declarative statement. Lead the way. And just like that, the flat line of my life took a sudden, terrifying swerve. The walk to the hotel was a blur of surreal silence. The covered walkway that connected the terminal to the Hyatt was drafty, the wind howling through unseen cracks and rattling the glass. Alex walked beside me, his long strides easily matching my hurried, nervous pace. He wasn't talking, and I was grateful. My mind was a chaotic mess of what-ifs and oh my gods. What had I just done? I had invited Alex Thorne, the Alex Thorne, to my hotel room. The absurdity of it was staggering. This was a man who probably stayed in penthouse suites, who commanded respect without even trying. I was a guy whose most exciting plan for the night had been room service and a spreadsheet. The hotel lobby was just as chaotic as the airport, a frantic hub of stranded travelers all vying for the same non-existent rooms. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic, weary look as I checked in. I was acutely aware of Alex standing behind me, a silent, solid presence at my back. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, or maybe I was just imagining it. My senses felt heightened, every nerve ending buzzing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Our room was on the 7th floor. It was a standard, soul-crushingly generic space. 2 queen beds, a desk, a television bolted to the wall, and a single armchair crammed into a corner. The art on the wall was an abstract swirl of beige and gray, a perfect visual representation of my emotional landscape. The air smelled of industrial-grade cleaner and stale air conditioning. Well, I said, the word falling flat in the quiet room. This is it. Alex dropped his duffel bag by the door with a soft thud. He surveyed the room, his expression giving nothing away. He was like a fortress. I had spent years trying to see past the walls, and now here he was, inside my temporary, beige-colored space, and I still couldn't read him. It's a room, he said, his voice a low rumble. Beats the floor at gate C14. Thanks, Leo. I owe you 1 inch. It's nothing, I mumbled, shrugging out of my coat and hanging it in the small closet. I needed to do something with my hands. I felt awkward and out of place in my own room. His presence seemed to shrink the space, charging the air with a strange, unfamiliar energy. He took up more than just physical room. He had an aura, a weight that pressed in on me. He took the bed farther from the door, sitting on the edge of the mattress to untie his boots. I watched the methodical way he worked the laces, the efficient movements of his large, capable hands. I found myself cataloging the details again. The worn leather of his boots, the way the denim of his jeans strained slightly at the thigh, the simple, dark gray Henley he wore that stretched across his broad shoulders. My brain was in overdrive, absorbing and analyzing every piece of data, trying to assemble it into a coherent picture, a narrative I could understand. The narrative that kept forming was one of profound, terrifying intimacy. He was here, in my room, taking off his shoes. The domesticity of the act was jarring. This wasn't Alex Thorne, the project management guru. This was just a man, tired and stranded, a man whose socks were a surprisingly cheerful shade of blue. I retreated to the other side of the room, busying myself with unpacking the few things I had in my carry-on: my laptop, a book I wouldn't read, my DOP kit. It was a performance of normalcy, a desperate attempt to pretend that this was just two coworkers sharing a space out of necessity. Nothing more. But my internal monologue was screaming. He's right there, 10 feet away. He's going to sleep in that bed. You're going to sleep in this bed. You're going to be in the same room, in the dark, all night. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. He stood up and stretched, his arms reaching for the ceiling. The hem of his shirt lifted, revealing a tantalizing strip of pale skin and the hard line of his abdomen. I snapped my gaze away, my face hot, and focused intently on arranging my toothbrush and toothpaste on the bathroom counter. I felt like a teenager with their first crush, clumsy and transparent. "I'm gonna grab a shower, if that's cool," he said from the doorway. "Yeah, of course," I said, my voice too quick, too high. "Go for it. Take your time." I heard the bathroom door click shut, followed by the sound of the shower turning on. I leaned against the cool tile of the wall, my eyes closed, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The sound of the water was a steady hiss, a temporary buffer against the overwhelming reality of the situation. For the next 10 minutes, I paced the small strip of carpet between the beds and the window. I looked out at the storm, the snow swirling in the orange glow of the airport lights. It was like looking into a snow globe that had been violently shaken. My own world felt just as turbulent. What did this mean? It probably meant nothing. It was a practical solution to a logistical problem. Alex needed a place to sleep. I had a spare bed. End of story. To him, this was a simple transaction. He'd probably forget it by the time we were back in the office. But for me, it was everything. It was a crack in the monotonous facade of my life, a wild, unexpected variable. I was a man who lived by data, and the data was clear. Alex Thorne was straight, confident, and completely out of my league. The probability of him seeing me as anything other than a convenient, quiet coworker was statistically insignificant. 0. And yet, he was here. He could have called other colleagues. We weren't the only two from our company on this trip. There were others, people he was undoubtedly friendlier with. Why had he approached me? Why had he accepted my offer so readily, without a hint of the awkwardness that was currently consuming me? My mind, my greatest asset and my cruelest torturer, began to spin scenarios. Maybe he knew. Maybe he'd picked up on my pathetic pining, the way my gaze lingered a second too long in meetings, and he was taking pity on me. The thought was mortifying. Or maybe, and this was the most dangerous, treacherous thought of all, maybe he wasn't as straight as I'd assumed. Maybe there was a sliver of a chance, a 1 in a million probability, that this wasn't just about a place to sleep. I shut down that line of thinking immediately. It was a fantasy, a dangerous deviation from the facts. Hope was a variable I couldn't afford to introduce into the equation. It would only lead to a system crash. The shower shut off. My heart leaped into my throat. I quickly sat on the edge of my designated bed, grabbing my phone and pretending to scroll through emails. I needed to look casual, unbothered. A man completely at ease with sharing a room with the object of his 2-year-long secret obsession. The bathroom door opened, and a cloud of steam billowed out, carrying with it the clean, sharp scent of hotel soap, and something else, something that was uniquely Alex. He had a towel slung low on his hips, another one rubbing his dark, damp hair. My breath caught. I had seen him in a suit, in business casual, but I had never, not even in my most vivid daydreams, imagined him like this. His chest was broad and dusted with dark hair that tapered down toward the towel. Water droplets clung to his skin, catching the light. He was solid, real, and overwhelmingly male. I stared at my phone, my eyes not registering the words on the screen. I could feel his presence, his heat, from across the room. My entire body was a live wire. "Feeling more human," he said, his voice a low murmur. He walked over to his duffel bag and pulled out a pair of gray sweatpants and a plain black t-shirt. He turned his back to me to change, a casual gesture of trust that felt anything but casual to me. I risked a glance, my eyes tracing the powerful lines of his back, the sharp definition of his shoulder blades. He was built like a swimmer, lean and strong. He turned back around, now dressed for sleep, and the sheer domesticity of the scene hit me again, harder this time. Alex Thorne, in sweatpants, in my hotel room. The world had tilted on its axis. "Your turn," he said, gesturing toward the bathroom. I practically fled, mumbling something incoherent. In the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, my forehead pressed to the cool wood. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a man with flushed cheeks and wide, panicked eyes. I needed to get a grip. This was just one night. 12 hours, tops. I could survive 12 hours. I took the fastest shower of my life, the spray barely warming my skin before I shut it off. I dressed in my own worn-out pajama pants and a t-shirt, feeling soft and indistinct compared to his solid presence. When I emerged, Alex was already in his bed, lying on his back with his hands laced behind his head, staring at the ceiling. The only light in the room came from the single lamp on the nightstand between the beds. It cast long shadows, making the space feel both smaller and more intimate. I slid into my own bed, the sheets cool and crisp against my skin. I lay on my back, mirroring his position, my eyes fixed on the same blank, textured ceiling. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. All I could hear was the hum of the HVAC unit and the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. And his breathing. It was a slow, steady rhythm. In, out. A quiet, constant presence in the dark. I found myself timing my own breaths to his, a subconscious act of synchronicity that felt profoundly intimate. This was a man I barely knew, and yet here we were, sharing the most private of spaces, the most vulnerable of times. Night. I obsessed over the small space between our beds. It was maybe 4 feet of industrial-grade carpeting, but it felt like a chasm. It also felt like no space at all. I was intensely aware of every small movement he made. The rustle of sheets as he shifted his weight. A quiet sigh that seemed to hold the weariness of the whole world. My internal analysis kicked into high gear. I replayed our entire interaction, from the bar to this very moment, searching for clues, for data points I might have missed. His steady gaze. His easy acceptance of my offer. The way he had turned his back to change. Was it trust, or was it simply that he didn't consider me a threat? That I was so far off his radar, so neutered in his eyes, that the concept of modesty was irrelevant. The thought stung. I risked turning my head to look at him. His eyes were closed now, his long lashes dark against his skin. In the soft lamplight, the hard edges of his face seemed to soften. The stern line of his jaw was relaxed. He looked younger, more vulnerable. A wave of something fierce and protective washed over me, an emotion so intense it startled me. It was more than just a crush. It was a deep, aching tenderness. He must have felt my eyes on him, because his own opened. They found mine in the dim light. My heart hammered against my ribs. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. I was trapped in that quiet, unreadable gaze. "You always this quiet, Leo?" he asked, his voice a soft rumble in the stillness. The question was so unexpected, so direct, it took me a moment to process. It was the first truly personal thing he had ever asked me. I swallowed. Usually, I managed to whisper. I'm better with numbers than with people. A faint smile touched his lips. I've noticed. My stomach dropped. He had noticed. He had been observing me, just as I had been observing him. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. What else had he noticed? "You're good with numbers," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Saved my ass on the Peterson account last quarter. That report you ran, found the flaw no one else saw." I was floored. I remembered the report, of course. I had spent a week buried in data, fueled by caffeine and the secret, pathetic hope that he might see my name on the final analysis. I never imagined he'd actually read it, let alone remembered it. It was just a data mismatch, I mumbled, deflecting the compliment. No, he said, his voice firm. It was good work. You see things other people miss. He held my gaze for another long moment, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not pity, not indifference. It looked like respect, and something else. Something deeper, something I couldn't name. He broke the contact first, turning his head to look back at the ceiling. We should get some sleep, he said. He reached over and switched off the lamp, plunging the room into near total darkness. The only light was a thin, cold sliver that crept in under the blackout curtains. Yeah, I breathed into the dark. Sleep. But sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. His words echoed in my head. You see things other people miss. He saw me. He actually saw me. The thought was a tiny, glowing ember in the vast, cold emptiness of my chest. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of his steady breathing, my mind replaying that one moment of connection over and over. The darkness felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with his presence, with the weight of unspoken possibilities. I was acutely aware of his body, just a few feet away. The warmth of him, the sheer, solid reality of him. The night wore on. The hum of the HVAC cycled on and off. I heard the distant, mournful sound of a snowplow. I traced the patterns of the light on the ceiling, trying to force my racing mind to quiet down. I was exhausted, but my body was thrumming with a nervous energy that made sleep impossible. I must have dozed off at some point, because I was startled awake by a sound. A low groan. I froze, my senses on high alert. It came again, from Alex's bed. A soft, pained sound, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Alex, I whispered into the dark. Silence. Then, a rustle of sheets. Snothing, he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Just a bad dream. But his breathing was off. It was faster, shallower. He shifted again, and another pained sound escaped his lips, this one more tightly controlled. Are you okay? I pushed myself up on one elbow, peering through the gloom. I could just make out his shape, a dark mass in the other bed. He let out a long, slow breath. Yeah, old injury. My shoulder. Acts up sometimes when it's cold, or when I sleep on it wrong. The stoic protector had a crack in his armor. The confession of physical weakness felt more intimate than anything he could have said. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered vulnerability. He wasn't the unflappable project manager right now. He was just a man in pain, in the dark. Is there anything I can do? The question was out before I could stop it. There was a long pause. I could hear him shift again, carefully. No, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I just need to get off it. And then I heard it. The sound of his feet hitting the carpeted floor. He stood up, a tall, broad silhouette against the faint light from the window. He stood there for a moment, and I could practically feel his hesitation from across the room. My heart was pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. My mind was a blank slate. All my analysis, all my carefully constructed probabilities, they all evaporated in that one, charged moment of silence. This was uncharted territory. He took a step, then another. He walked the few feet that separated our beds and stopped at the edge of my mattress. I could feel the dip in the bed as he sat down, his back to me. The warmth of his body seeped through the comforter. He smelled of soap and sleep. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, breathing slowly, deliberately, as if trying to master the pain in his shoulder. I lay perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. My entire universe had shrunk to this one moment, to the weight of him on my bed, to the inches that separated us. This is it. My mind is screaming. This is the moment where everything changes or everything stays exactly the same. The air is so thick I can barely draw a breath. He's so close. If I just reached out my hand, I could touch him. The thought is terrifying. It's exhilarating. He finally lets out a long, weary sigh, the sound cutting through the stillness. It's a sound of defeat, of surrender. Then he speaks, his voice a low, rough whisper that seems to vibrate right through the mattress and into my bones. Move over. It wasn't a question. It was a command, but a soft one. Gentle. It was a plea and a statement all at once. It was the most vulnerable, most honest thing I had ever heard. My body moves before my brain can catch up. I am a system executing a command without question. I shift, pulling the comforter with me, creating a space beside me. A space for him. The movement is clumsy, jerky. My limbs feel disconnected from my brain. He doesn't hesitate. He swings his legs up onto the bed and lies down on his back, his head settling on the pillow next to mine. The mattress dips with his weight, rolling me slightly toward him. He is careful not to touch me, but the space between us is electric. It's a millimeter of cold air separating two powerful magnets. I can feel the heat of him, smell the clean scent of his skin. We lie there, side by side, in the dark. The silence is absolute. There is no more humming HVAC, no distant snowplow. There is only the sound of two people breathing in the same small space. His breathing is still a little too fast, a little too shallow. Mine feels like it has stopped altogether. My mind is a riot, a supernova of panic and wonder. He is in my bed. Alex Thorne is in my bed. The thought repeats on a loop, each repetition sending a fresh jolt through my system. What does this mean? Is this just about his shoulder? Is he in so much pain that this is purely a practical matter, a way to lie down without putting pressure on it? Of course it is. That's the logical explanation. The only explanation that fits the data. But my heart, that illogical, reckless organ, is telling a different story. It's telling me that a man like Alex doesn't show weakness. He doesn't ask for help. He doesn't crawl into another man's bed just because his shoulder hurts. There are chairs. There's the floor. There were 1,000 other options besides this one. He chose this one. He chose me. The thought is so overwhelming, so staggering, that I feel a tremor run through me. I clench my fists at my sides, trying to will myself to be still, to be calm, to not give away the absolute chaos raging inside me. He must feel the small movement, the vibration through the mattress. He shifts slightly, and the back of his hand brushes against mine. It's a spark, a jolt of pure electricity that shoots up my arm and explodes in my chest. It's the most insignificant of touches, an accident born of proximity, but it feels like a brand. I snatch my hand away as if I've been burned, my heart jackhammering against my ribs. The silence that follows is deafening. I have ruined it. My panic, my ridiculous overreaction, has shattered the fragile truce of the moment. He's going to get up now. He's going to say something, make an excuse, and retreat to the other bed. And this will become another awkward, unspoken thing between us, another piece of evidence for the file labeled, Reasons Why Leo is a Pathetic Weirdo. I lie there, frozen, waiting for the inevitable rejection. But it doesn't come. Instead, after a moment that stretches into an eternity, I feel him move again. It's a deliberate, conscious movement this time. Slow, purposeful. And then his hand is back. It covers mine, his fingers gently, tentatively, wrapping around my own. My breath leaves my body in a rush. This is not an accident. This is not a mistake. His hand is warm and solid and real. His fingers are long, his palm calloused from work I can't even imagine. He laces his fingers through mine, a simple, perfect interlocking of two separate people. It is not a sexual touch. It is something far more profound. It's a question and an answer. It's an anchor in the storm. It's a confession made without a single word. All the noise in my head, the frantic analysis, the endless calculations of probability, it all just stops. The chaos recedes, leaving behind a vast, quiet plain of pure feeling. There is no more data to process. There is only this. The warmth of his hand, the steady weight of it, the quiet, rhythmic sound of his breathing, which is starting to slow down, to deepen, to match my own. I turn my head on the pillow, slowly. In the gloom, I can just make out his profile, the strong line of his nose and jaw. He turns his head to face me. I can't really see his eyes, but I can feel his gaze. It's the same steady, unwavering gaze from the bar, from across the bed, but this time it feels different. It's not assessing me. It's seeing me. Something inside me, a tightly coiled spring of fear and loneliness I've carried for as long as I can remember, finally, blessedly, unwinds. Tears prick at the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden. I am not invisible. I am not just a convenient solution to a logistical problem. I am here, and he is here, and our hands are linked in the dark. He gives my hand a gentle squeeze, a small, reassuring pressure. It's enough. It's everything. I squeeze back. And in the quiet of that sterile hotel room, with a blizzard raging outside, I close my eyes and, For the first time in a very long time, I don't feel like I'm standing still. I feel like I am finally moving. And for the first time, I don't feel the need to calculate where I'm going. I just know I'm not going there alone. I fell asleep, truly asleep, with the solid weight of his hand in mine, an anchor in the quiet dark. I woke to the gray, muted light of a snow-choked morning. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to place the unfamiliar weight and warmth beside me. Then it all came rushing back in a dizzying, heart-stopping flood. Alex, his hand in mine, his body, a solid, reassuring presence in my bed. My eyes snapped open. He was still there. He had shifted in the night, turning onto his side to face me. His arm was draped over my waist, his hand resting lightly on my hip. His face was only inches from mine, his features relaxed in sleep. His dark hair was a mess, falling across his forehead. A faint line of stubble shadowed his jaw, darker and rougher than it had been the night before. His lips were slightly parted, and a soft, rhythmic breath feathered against my cheek. He looked peaceful, vulnerable. All the walls, all the stoic control, were gone, stripped away by sleep. In their place was just a man. A beautiful, sleeping man. And he was in my arms. Sort of. His arm was around me. The distinction felt monumental. A wave of pure, unadulterated panic crashed over me. What had we done? What had I done? Last night, in the dark, it had all felt so simple, so right. A silent, mutual understanding. But now, in the harsh light of morning, doubt and anxiety began their insidious creep. This was Alex Thorne, my senior colleague. A man I barely knew. A man who was, for all I knew, simply seeking comfort from pain and loneliness on a stormy night. A moment of weakness. A fluke. My mind, my old, cruel friend, started supplying the data. Probability of regret, high. Probability of mourning after awkwardness, near certain. Probability of him pulling away and pretending nothing happened, off the charts. I had to move. I had to create distance before he woke up, before he could see the hopeful, pathetic adoration that was no doubt written all over my face. I needed to reset the situation, to put the walls back up before he had a chance to build his even higher. Slowly, carefully, I began to extricate myself. I held my breath, lifting his arm an inch at a time. It was heavier than I expected, solid with muscle. His skin was warm against the thin cotton of my shirt. The contact sent a fresh jolt through my system, a memory of the electricity from the night before. I finally managed to slide out from under his arm and slip out of the bed. The cold air of the room hit my skin, and I felt a profound sense of loss from the absence of his warmth. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, watching him. He didn't stir. He just mumbled something in his sleep and rolled onto his back, one arm flung out across the empty space where I had just been. I retreated to the bathroom on silent feet, closing the door with a barely audible click. I stared at my reflection. I looked pale, haunted, my eyes wide with a familiar, anxious energy. This was me. This was the real Leo. The overthinking, terrified man who ran from anything that felt too good, too real. What was I supposed to do now? How do you act around a man after you've held his hand all night? Do you make coffee? Do you talk about the weather? Do you pretend you both just happened to fall asleep in the same bed, and it's no big deal? There was no protocol for this. No spreadsheet. No algorithm that could provide the right answer. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it doing little to clear my head. I brushed my teeth, the mundane ritual a flimsy shield against the tidal wave of my emotions. When I finally worked up the nerve to leave the bathroom, Alex was awake. He was sitting up in my bed, our bed, with the sheet pulled around his waist. He was rubbing the sleep from his eyes with the heel of his hand, his hair sticking up in a dozen different directions. The sight was so incredibly endearing, so domestic, that it made my chest ache. He looked up as I came out, and his eyes met mine. The moment stretched. My throat went dry. Here it comes, I thought. The polite smile. The man. That was a weird night, the swift and brutal erection of boundaries. I braced myself for the impact. But it never came. He just looked at me. His gaze was clear, steady, and completely unreadable. The silence was thick with all the things we hadn't said. Then, the corner of his mouth ticked upward in that small, almost smile of his. "Morning," he said. His voice was a low, scratchy rasp. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Morning," I managed to reply, my own voice tight. He stretched, rolling his good shoulder. He didn't look away from me. "Sleep okay?" he asked. The question was loaded. It was a test. He wasn't asking about the quality of my rest. He was asking about last night. This was my chance to give him an out. I could say, "Yeah, fine," and move on, letting the moment dissipate, letting it become a strange, unspoken memory. It was the safe choice, the logical choice. But looking at him, sitting there in my rumpled bed, his gaze open and waiting, I found I didn't want the safe choice. For once in my life, I wanted to input a reckless variable and see what happened. "I slept better than I have in a long time," I said, the words quiet but firm. It was the truth. It was a confession. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of relief, maybe. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. He nodded slowly, as if accepting a piece of critical data. "Me too," he said, and his voice was soft. "My shoulder doesn't even hurt." We stayed like that for another moment, just looking at each other across the room. The awkwardness was still there, a faint hum in the background, but it was overshadowed by something else. A fragile, tentative sense of connection. He wasn't running. He wasn't building walls. He was just here, with me. The spell was broken by a knock at the door. We both jumped. I looked at the door, then back at Alex, a fresh wave of panic rising. We had other colleagues stranded here. What if it was one of them? What would they think, seeing Alex Thorne emerging from my room first thing in the morning? The potential for gossip, for speculation, was terrifying. "I'll get it," I whispered, as if we were conspirators. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was room service, with the coffee and pastries I had ordered online from the bathroom 5 minutes ago in a desperate bid for normalcy. I opened the door, signed the slip, and took the tray, my hands shaking slightly. When I turned back, Alex was pulling on his t-shirt. He had moved from the bed to the small table by the window. The intimacy of the bedroom scene was broken, replaced by the slightly more formal setting of two colleagues about to have a business breakfast. The shift was jarring. I set the tray down between us. I poured 2 cups of coffee, my movements stiff and overly precise. I handed one to him, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. That tiny spark was still there. I pulled my hand back quickly. We drank our coffee in silence for a few minutes, watching the snow, which had finally stopped falling. The world outside was muffled and white, the sky a flat, uniform gray. "Looks like we're stuck for another day," Alex said, breaking the silence. "Just heard the airport won't have runways cleared until late tonight, earliest." Another day. The thought was both a blessing and a curse. More time with him. More time for this fragile, undefined thing between us to shatter. "Okay," I said, my mind already racing. What did we do for a whole day? We couldn't just stay in this room. That felt too intimate, too loaded. But the idea of going out, of navigating the public spaces of the hotel, as whatever we were, was equally daunting. This was the test. The real world, or at least the hotel world, intruding on the safe bubble of our room. We had to go down for a real breakfast eventually. We would inevitably run into other people from our company. Sarah from marketing, maybe, or Ken from sales. They were both on our flight. What would they see when they looked at us? 2 coworkers who shared a room out of necessity, or something else? Alex seemed to read my mind. "We should probably head down to the lobby," he said, his tone neutral. "See what the flight situation is." It was a logical suggestion, a professional suggestion, and it felt like a retreat. My heart sank. Maybe I had misread everything. Maybe the hand-holding, the shared bed, the quiet morning gaze, maybe it was all just a product of the storm, a temporary aberration that would be corrected as soon as we were back in our normal environment. I just nodded, my voice gone. I watched him as he stood up and gathered his things, moving with his usual quiet efficiency. He was putting his armor back on. The fortress walls were going back up, brick by brick. By the time he was dressed in the same jeans and Henley from the day before, he looked once again like Alex Thorne, project manager. Not the man who had looked at me with such vulnerability in the dark. I felt a fool, a naive, hopeful fool. I had let a single night of proximity and a moment of shared weakness rewrite years of data. The original equation was the correct one, after all. We left the room and walked down the long, silent hallway to the elevator. The 4-foot chasm between us was back, wider and deeper than ever. In the elevator, we stood on opposite sides, staring at the floor indicator. The silence was excruciating. It wasn't the comfortable, charged silence of the night before. It was a cold, empty void. The lobby was bustling with stranded guests. I saw Sarah from marketing immediately. She was in a heated conversation with the concierge. She spotted us the moment we stepped out of the elevator. "Leo? Alex," she called out, waving us over. "Isn't this a nightmare?" "That's one word for it," Alex said, his voice smooth and professional. He was completely back in his work persona. There was no trace of the man from room 714. "Did you guys manage to find a room?" Sarah asked, her eyes darting between us. "I had to sleep on a cot they set up in one of the conference rooms. My back is killing me." I opened my mouth to say something, to formulate a plausible lie, but Alex spoke first. "Leo had a room with 2 beds, he said, his tone casual, matter of fact. "He was decent enough to let me crash." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. The touch was electric. It was friendly. It was collegial. It was completely public. And yet, under his palm, I could feel a warmth that seeped through my shirt, a faint, possessive pressure that was meant only for me. His thumb stroked the back of my shoulder, a tiny, secret gesture that sent a shockwave through my entire body. I looked up at him. He was looking at Sarah, a polite smile on his face, but for a fraction of a second, his eyes flicked to mine. And in that fleeting glance, I saw it again. The same look from the night before. The connection. The silent confession. He wasn't retreating. He wasn't building walls. He was hiding us in plain sight. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic maneuver. He was protecting this fragile, new thing. He was protecting me. The stoic protector, indeed. A slow, real smile spread across my face. Not a nervous twitch, not a polite grimace, but a genuine expression of relief and dawning joy. I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Alex saw it. His own smile deepened, the corner of his eye crinkling in a way I had never seen before. "Yeah," I said, finding my voice. I looked at Sarah, but I was talking to him. It was no trouble at all. The rest of the day passed in a strange, dreamlike state. We were a team, a unit of 2 navigating the surreal landscape of the hotel. We ate breakfast in the crowded restaurant, Alex positioning himself so our knees brushed under the table. We walked the length of the terminal, checking on flight statuses, his hand occasionally finding the small of my back as he guided me through a crowd. Each touch was fleeting, publicly deniable, but charged with a private, intimate meaning. We talked, not about what had happened, not directly, but we talked about other things. He asked me about my hometown, about the book I was carrying, about the intricate watch I wore that had been my grandfather's. I learned that his stoicism was a learned trait, a defense mechanism from a chaotic childhood. I learned he had a younger sister he was fiercely protective of. I learned he hated the taste of cilantro, and that his favorite place in the world was a small, quiet lake in northern Minnesota. I found myself opening up in a way I never had before. I told him about my passion for data, not as a job, but as a way of finding order in a messy world. I told him about my grandfather, the quiet man who had taught me to see the beauty in numbers and patterns. I even told him a stupid, embarrassing story from college that made him laugh. A real laugh, a deep, warm sound that made my heart feel like it was expanding. We were building something, conversation by conversation, shared glance by shared glance. We were creating a new data set, a new narrative. The distance between us was shrinking, the chasm closing, until there was no space left at all. By late afternoon, the airport announced it was reopening. A few flights were scheduled for that night. Ours was one of them. The news was met with a cheer throughout the hotel, but for me, it brought a pang of sadness. Our time in this strange, isolated bubble was coming to an end. Soon, we would be back in the real world, back at the office, back in our separate lives. The fear began to creep back in. Was this just a snowstorm romance? A product of forced proximity and shared crisis? Would it all evaporate once we were back on familiar ground? We collected our bags from the room, the space now feeling charged with memories. As I did a final sweep, Alex stood by the door, watching me. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. Ready. We didn't speak on the way to the gate. The comfortable silence had been replaced by a new tension. The tension of the unknown. The future. We found our seats at the crowded gate, the familiar hum of the airport once again surrounding us. But it sounded different now. It was no longer the sound of loneliness. It was the sound of departure, of transition. We were leaving the bubble. Alex was quiet, his gaze distant as he stared out the window at the flurry of activity on the tarmac. The fortress walls seemed to be back, his expression unreadable once more. My carefully constructed hope began to crumble. It had been a beautiful, impossible dream, a statistical anomaly. Now it was over. They called our boarding group. We shuffled along in the line, two colleagues heading home after a business trip. Nothing more. We found our seats on the plane, an aisle and a middle. I took the middle, he took the aisle. The armrest between us felt like a mile-wide barrier. The plane took off, pressing me back into my seat. I watched the lights of Chicago shrink below us, a glittering web of possibility that felt a million miles away. I felt a profound sense of loss, an ache so deep it was physical. I had been given a glimpse of a different life, a different pattern, and now it was being snatched away. I stared resolutely ahead, focusing on the back of the seat in front of me, fighting the burn of tears behind my eyes. I was a fool to have thought it could be anything more. And then, I felt it. A warmth against my hand, which was resting on my leg. I looked down. Alex's hand was there, covering mine. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his expression neutral. But his fingers were slowly, deliberately lacing through mine, just as they had in the dark. His thumb began to stroke the back of my hand, a slow, steady, reassuring rhythm. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just about the storm. I turned my head to look at him. He finally turned to meet my gaze. His eyes were clear and steady, and in their depths, I saw a promise. A future. This wasn't just because we were stuck, Leo, he said, his voice a low murmur, meant only for me, easily lost in the drone of the engines. I know, I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. He held my gaze for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between us. Then he turned his attention back to the front, but he didn't let go of my hand. He held it tightly, a solid, unwavering anchor. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, a real, true smile on my face. The data was incomplete. My original analysis had been flawed. I had failed to account for the most powerful variable of all, the human heart. The pattern of my life was no longer a flat line. It was a soaring, beautiful arc, and I had no idea where it was going. For the first time, the not knowing didn't scare me. I felt the steady, warm pressure of his hand in mine, a silent promise in the humming darkness of the airplane cabin. I felt like I'd come home.